The flashbulbs were blinding. Tristan Kane could barely see the crowd pressing against the barricades, their chants clashing with the thunder of clicking cameras. His name ricocheted through the swarm of reporters, their voices a blur of accusations and questions he refused to answer. And then, out of all the noise, he saw her. Rosie Miller stood at the edge of the chaos, not with a microphone or camera, but with fury in her eyes. Her apron was still dusted with flour, a stubborn strand of hair clinging to her cheek. Unlike everyone else, she didn't want a piece of him. She wanted an explanation. "You lied to me," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The words pierced deeper than the flashbulbs, deeper than the headlines that threatened to ruin him. In that moment, Tristan Kane, billionaire, titan of industry, untouchable in every other part of his life, was undone by a small-town woman who had fed him stew in a paper bowl under lantern lights. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Weeks earlier, Tristan had been the one giving orders, not faltering beneath them. But after the latest scandal splashed across every major business outlet, his PR team insisted he disappear for a while. "Lay low," they said. "No New York, no LA, no London. Somewhere no one would think to look." And that's how he found himself in Willow Creek, population 3,000, staring out the tinted window of his chauffeured SUV at rows of clapboard houses, a main street frozen in time, and banners advertising something called the Summer Jubilee Festival. He pressed his thumb to his temple, irritation building. "This is absurd," he muttered. Across from him, his assistant, Logan, offered a sheepish smile. "It's the perfect cover, sir. No one will expect Tristan Kane, Fortune magazine's most eligible bachelor billionaire, to be eating funnel cake in a field. You'll blend right in." Tristan gave him a sharp look. "I don't blend." Logan didn't argue because he knew it was true. Tristan's tailored navy suit, even off the private jet, screamed money. His presence carried weight, the kind that turned heads in boardrooms and scared off competitors. But here in Willow Creek, the weight felt misplaced, unwanted even. The SUV rolled past the square where townsfolk were stringing up lanterns and wooden stalls. Children ran barefoot in the grass, laughter ringing out like something from a forgotten dream. Tristan turned his gaze away, the knot in his chest tightening. He wasn't here for festivals. He wasn't here for charm. He was here to vanish. But fate, he would later learn, had other plans. Because somewhere beyond those lanterns, Rosie Miller was setting up her food stall, wiping her hands on a checkered towel, humming to herself as pots simmered and spices perfumed the air. And though they hadn't yet spoken, their worlds were already on a collision course neither of them could stop. The morning sun was mercilessly cheerful. Birds sang as though they were paid for their optimism, and the streets of Willow Creek buzzed with preparations for the summer jubilee. Tristan Kane stood at the window of his rented Victorian house on the edge of town, jaw set, hands shoved deep in his pockets, wishing he could silence it all. Banners flapped against storefronts. Brightly painted signs advertised Pie Bake-Off and Chili Cookout in red and blue lettering. A brass band rehearsed near the gazebo in the square, the trumpet slightly off-key. None of it appealed to him. He wasn't a man who mingled with small-town charm. He negotiated billion-dollar deals across continents, not raffle tickets at church fundraisers. Logan, his assistant, knocked on the doorframe. "Sir, the mayor personally invited you to attend the festival." Tristan turned slowly, narrowing his gaze. "And why exactly would I care about that?" "Because," Logan replied carefully, "your absence might raise more suspicion than your presence. You're supposed to be laying low, not acting like a recluse. Blend in. Smile at a few locals. Eat a corn dog. No one will question why you're here." Tristan's laugh was humorless. "Do I look like the type of man who eats corn dogs?" "No," Logan admitted. "But you might need to look like it for the weekend." For a long moment, Tristan considered arguing. His instinct was to resist, to snap that no one told him where to go, least of all some small-town politician. But the tension in Logan's eyes reminded him. His company was hanging by a thread. Investors were skittish. The press was circling like vultures. A smiling photo of him in a town square might buy him goodwill, or at the very least, stall the sharks. "Fine," he said at last, tugging his sunglasses from his pocket. "But I'm leaving as soon as it gets unbearable. Which, I suspect, will be within 5 minutes." The festival was already in full swing by the time Tristan arrived. Children darted between stalls painted in bright stripes. Women carried baskets of flowers, their laughter mingling with the rhythm of a fiddle. The scent of fried dough and grilled meat hung heavy in the air, foreign to a man accustomed to private chefs and Michelin stars. He moved through the crowd like a shadow, every bit the outsider. Conversations dimmed when he passed, curious eyes noting the sharp suit, the polished shoes, the aloof expression. He didn't smile back. A cluster of women on the corner giggled behind their hands. "He's not from around here," one whispered. "Too good-looking to be." "Probably someone's cousin visiting for the weekend," another suggested, though her tone carried more curiosity than certainty. Tristan ignored them. He had perfected that skill long ago, pretending not to hear the chatter, not to feel the stares. He only wanted to make an appearance, maybe buy something, then retreat back into the silence of his rented house. But then the smell hit him. It wasn't the greasy sweetness of fried dough or the charred scent of hamburgers. This was richer, layered with spices he couldn't immediately name. Something savory, slow-cooked, warm. His stomach tightened before he realized how long it had been since he'd eaten anything beyond Logan's attempts at sandwiches. His eyes tracked the source. At the far end of the square, beneath a canopy strung with lanterns, a stall stood apart from the others. A hand-painted sign read Rosie's Kitchen in looping cursive. Steam rose from a pair of large pots, curling into the air like an invitation. Behind the counter, a woman worked with effortless rhythm. She ladled stew into bowls, passed plates of cornbread, and laughed with a group of children who leaned over the counter to beg for extra honey butter. She wore a simple sundress under her apron, curls pulled back into two playful buns, her dark skin glowing under the sun. Rosie Miller. Tristan didn't know her name yet, but something about the scene rooted him to the spot. She wasn't putting on a performance. She wasn't vying for attention. She was simply there, completely herself, and the energy around her stall was magnetic. Logan nudged his shoulder. "Might be a good chance to interact with the locals, sir. Buy some food. Blend in." Tristan gave him a withering glance. "You really think I'm going to stand in line like—" He stopped mid-sentence because Rosie had looked up, just briefly. Her eyes met his across the crowd, steady and unflinching. Not curious, not impressed, just aware. And for reasons he couldn't explain, his feet moved toward her stall. The line wasn't long, but Tristan despised waiting. He tugged at his cuffs, impatient, while Rosie worked with methodical grace. She didn't rush, not even for the man whose presence drew whispers from those around him. When it was finally his turn, he stepped forward. "Whatever that is," he said, nodding toward the simmering pot, "I'll take it." Rosie's brows arched. "You don't even know what it is." "I don't need to," he replied coolly. "It smells adequate." Her eyes narrowed, the first flicker of annoyance breaking through her calm. "Adequate? Honey, this is beef stew the way my grandmother taught me. If you can't tell the difference between adequate and unforgettable, maybe you should stick to corn dogs." A ripple of laughter spread among the people nearby. Tristan stiffened, unaccustomed to being dismissed so casually. Rosie didn't wait for his reply. She ladled the stew into a paper bowl, set it down with a square of cornbread and pushed it across the counter. $5. He reached for his wallet but paused. He hadn't carried cash in years. Only platinum cards, concierge services, digital transfers. Slowly, awkwardly, he realized he had nothing to hand her. Her smirk deepened. "No cash? Then I guess you're eating air today." The crowd chuckled again and Tristan felt heat creep into his collar. For once, he was the man caught unprepared, the man being laughed at. He hated it. Logan, mercifully, slipped a bill from his pocket and paid. Rosie took it without breaking eye contact with Tristan. "Enjoy," she said, her voice flat but her eyes sharp. And for the first time in years, Tristan Kane didn't know whether he'd just been fed or challenged. Tristan sat at one of the wooden benches near Rosie's stall, the paper bowl before him steaming with a rich, savory aroma. He stared at it as though it were a challenge. The stew was thick, a deep mahogany broth cradling chunks of beef, carrots, and potatoes. Beside it, the golden cornbread glistened with a thin layer of butter that melted slowly under the summer sun. The scent wrapped around him like a memory he couldn't quite place, warm, earthy, and unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. He glanced over his shoulder. Rosie had gone back to serving her other customers, moving with a rhythm that was confident but unhurried. She laughed at something a child said, passed a plate across the counter, and brushed her flour-dusted hands against her apron. She didn't look at him once. That unsettled him more than he expected. People usually looked at him, lingered, stared, whispered. But Rosie? She had dismissed him as though he were just another man in line. Tristan picked up the spoon, more curious than hungry, and dipped it into the stew. The first bite hit him like a revelation. The beef melted tenderly against his tongue, rich with layers of spice that seemed to unfold slowly: garlic, black pepper, something smoky he couldn't identify. The broth was deep and hearty, coating his throat with warmth. The cornbread crumbled perfectly, sweet and soft, pairing with the stew like an old companion. He wasn't expecting it to be good. Not really. But this was more than good. It was the kind of food that silenced you, demanded you pay attention. The kind of food that made you remember something you'd lost. For Tristan, it was his mother's kitchen. A flash of memory slipped through the cracks of his carefully built walls. Sunday afternoons in Connecticut, before the money, before the empire. His mother stirring a pot of something simple while humming a tune off-key. The warmth of a home where no one cared about profits or board meetings. He hadn't thought of those days in years. He swallowed hard, the taste almost too intimate. "Don't choke now," Rosie's voice floated over, sharp enough to cut through the haze. He looked up to see her watching him this time, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. Tristan cleared his throat, forcing his composure. "It's fine." A slow smile tugged at her lips. "Fine, huh? That's all you've got?" "Perfectly adequate," he said, echoing his earlier jab, though the corner of his mouth betrayed the hint of a smirk. She leaned across the counter, her eyes glinting. "Adequate is what you call gas station sandwiches. That," she nodded at his nearly empty bowl, "is soul food. Don't lie to yourself, stranger." The people around them chuckled again, enjoying the banter. Tristan felt the faintest burn of embarrassment, but there was no malice in her words. Rosie wasn't mocking him like the tabloids did. She was challenging him, daring him to be honest. And honesty wasn't something Tristan Kane was used to. "I've had worse," he said at last, his voice quieter, more serious. Rosie tilted her head, studying him. She wasn't fooled, but she let it go, turning to serve the next customer. For the next hour, Tristan lingered at the edge of the festival, pretending to take in the sights but finding his eyes drifting back to Rosie's stall again and again. The way she commanded the space fascinated him. She wasn't wealthy, powerful, or famous, yet everyone seemed to know her. People called her name from across the square, dropped by just to chat, brought their children to her for an extra cookie. Rosie Miller wasn't just running a stall, she was the heartbeat of the festival. And Tristan hated how much he noticed. He wasn't here to form connections. He wasn't here to indulge in nostalgia or be charmed by small-town smiles. He was here to hide. Yet, as the sun began to sink and lanterns flickered to life, he found himself wandering back toward Rosie's kitchen. This time the line was shorter. She spotted him immediately and raised an eyebrow. "Back already?" Tristan adjusted his cuffs. "I wanted to confirm my earlier assessment. To be sure it wasn't a fluke." She let out a laugh, rich and genuine. "Well, aren't you thorough? What'll it be, another stew?" He hesitated. "What else do you have?" Her eyes softened slightly as though she hadn't expected him to ask. "Fried catfish, sweet potato pie, collard greens. Depends on how brave you're feeling." Brave. The word stuck with him. "I'll try the pie," he said. Rosie sliced him a piece, the crust golden and flaky, the filling smooth and fragrant with cinnamon. She slid the plate toward him with a knowing look. When he took the first bite, the sweetness was balanced, the spices lingering like a secret. He tried not to react, but Rosie caught the flicker in his eyes anyway. "Thought so," she said, her smile smug but warm. Tristan set down the fork, studying her openly now. "You take this very seriously." Her chin lifted. "Of course I do. Food tells people who you are. It tells them where you come from, what you value. You can't fake it." He leaned slightly closer, intrigued. "And what does your food say about you, Ms. Miller?" Rosie's smile faltered for the briefest second, then steadied. "It says I know my worth. And I don't need anyone else's approval to prove it." The answer landed heavier than he expected. Tristan was a man who lived on approval, stockholders, clients, the media. His entire existence was built on being validated. And here was this woman, running a food stall in a tiny town, telling him she didn't need what he spent his life chasing. It unsettled him. Fascinated him. Before he could reply, a voice called out from the crowd. "Rosie, we're running low on plates." She turned quickly, giving him a brisk nod before disappearing into the back of the stall. Tristan sat there, staring at the empty plate before him, his chest oddly tight. He had come to Willow Creek to escape the world. He hadn't planned on finding one woman capable of unraveling him with a bowl of stew and a slice of pie. And though he refused to admit it, even to himself, Tristan Kane knew this festival had just become more complicated than he could have imagined. By the second day of the summer jubilee, Rosie Miller had heard just about every excuse in the book. Some customers claimed they were just browsing before eventually circling back for a plate of stew. Others asked if she gave discounts for big orders that turned out to be only 2 plates. And at least one teenager tried to slip away without paying, though he didn't get far before Rosie's sharp whistle called him back. But none of them tested her patience quite like Tristan Kane. He was back again, standing in line in that too-sharp suit that looked ridiculous in the summer heat. The other townsfolk wore jeans, sundresses, and straw hats. Tristan wore his wealth-like armor, the sheen of his shoes untouched by dust, his watch glinting in the sun. He looked like he'd been dropped in from another planet, and had no intention of blending in. When his turn came, Rosie braced herself. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Adequate," she said, folding her arms across her apron. "You here to insult my cooking again, or did you finally come to admit the truth?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "I came because the line at the corndog stand was too long." A ripple of laughter spread through the people nearby. Rosie arched a brow, unimpressed. "You just keep telling yourself that, fancy man. What'll it be?" He scanned the chalkboard menu with exaggerated seriousness, then said, "Stew." Again. She reached for the ladle but didn't serve him right away. "You know, you could try something new. Broaden those expensive horizons. Ever had collard greens?" His lips curved into a faint, smug smile. "I don't experiment with food. Consistency matters." Rosie's laugh was quick and sharp. "Consistency? That's what you want from an accountant, not a kitchen. Food is about life. Messy, surprising, full of flavor." The customers around them chuckled again, nodding at her words. Tristan, however, didn't laugh. His jaw tightened. "You seem very sure of yourself," he said coolly. She tilted her head, her gaze steady. "And you seem like a man who's afraid of being wrong." That landed harder than he expected. For a moment, he just stared at her, the weight of her observation cutting through his defenses. Then, with practiced ease, he smoothed his expression back into indifference. "Or maybe," he said evenly, "I'm just a man who knows what he likes." Rosie ladled stew into a bowl, her movements brisk. "If you say so." She slid it across the counter with a decisive push. "That'll be 5. Logan, ever the quiet savior, stepped forward and handed her the bill before Tristan could fumble for cash again. Rosie smirked at the exchange. "You really ought to carry money if you're gonna play small town," she said. "Can't have your assistant bailing you out every time." Tristan's eyes narrowed. "How do you know he's my assistant?" "Because men like you don't stand in line alone," she said simply. "You bring someone to do the waiting for you. Only reason you're here yourself is because you're trying to prove something. To me, maybe. To yourself, definitely." Her words, casual but cutting, landed with uncomfortable precision. Tristan wasn't used to being read so easily. Most people saw only the billionaire, the powerful figure. Rosie seemed to look past all that, straight to the man underneath, and he wasn't sure he liked it. He picked up the bowl, his voice clipped. "You're very perceptive for someone who sells stew out of a tent." The square went quiet for a beat. A few people glanced between them, sensing the tension. Rosie's face didn't flinch, but her eyes sharpened. "And you're very arrogant for someone who doesn't even know how to carry $5. The silence cracked with laughter from a few nearby teenagers, though it wasn't cruel, it was solidarity, small-town folks backing up one of their own. Rosie didn't smile though. Her words weren't meant to entertain, they were meant to draw a line. For the first time in a long while, Tristan felt like he'd been knocked off balance. He wanted to retort, to win, but something about her gaze, steady, unflinching, made him hesitate. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't impressed by him. And that, more than anything, infuriated him. He set the bowl back down on the counter, untouched. "Keep it." Then he turned on his heel and strode away, his shoulders rigid, his sunglasses hiding the storm in his eyes. Logan hurried after him, murmuring something Tristan didn't bother to hear. Rosie watched him go, her chest tight. It wasn't that she disliked him, not exactly. There was something about him that pulled her attention no matter how much she resisted. But she also knew his kind, men with too much money and too little humility. Men who thought they could buy respect instead of earning it. She wasn't about to be impressed by a sharp jawline and a custom suit. Still, as she ladled stew for the next customer, she caught herself glancing toward the direction he'd gone, her mind replaying the brief flash of vulnerability she thought she'd seen before his walls slammed back into place. For all his arrogance, Tristan Kane didn't strike her as a man who was truly untouchable. And Rosie Miller had learned long ago that people who tried hardest to hide their wounds were often the ones who carried the deepest scars. That evening, when the lanterns lit up the square and music floated from the bandstand, Rosie spotted him again at the far edge of the festival. He stood apart from the crowd, tall and solitary, his expression unreadable. He didn't come back to her stall. He didn't speak to anyone. But his eyes found hers across the square. For one breathless moment, the noise of the festival fell away, and it was just the two of them, locked in a silent battle neither was ready to name. Then Rosie looked away, forcing herself to focus on the next customer. If Tristan Kane thought he could stroll into Willow Creek and unsettle her, he had another thing coming. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to admit even to herself, Rosie knew the truth. He already had. Tristan hadn't meant to return. After the sharp words exchanged at Rosie's stall, he had sworn he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him again. He wasn't accustomed to being dismissed, certainly not by a woman in an apron serving stew in paper bowls. But the next morning, as he walked through the festival square trying to appear disinterested, the scent stopped him in his tracks. It was the same as before, rich spices, something savory, something warm. His stomach betrayed him, tightening with hunger. He hadn't eaten breakfast. He barely slept. And the memory of Rosie's food, the stew, the pie, lingered like a secret he didn't want to admit. Logan, trailing at his side, noticed his pause. "You're staring at her stall again." "I am not." "Yes, you are." Logan's tone was mild, but the twitch of a smile tugged at his lips. Tristan adjusted his sunglasses. "I'm only observing the festival. Blending in as you insisted." "Right?" Logan said, unconvinced. "And blending in requires you to glare at Rosie Miller's food stall like it owes you money?" Tristan shot him a look, but before he could retort, Rosie herself appeared behind the counter, setting out trays of fried catfish and baskets of cornbread. Her curls were tied up again, her apron dusted with flour, and her laughter carried across the square as she greeted customers by name. Something twisted in Tristan's chest. She belonged here. Every smile she gave was real, every laugh unforced. It wasn't performance, it was connection. He couldn't remember the last time he had belonged anywhere. Against his better judgment, his feet carried him closer. Rosie saw him coming before he reached the stall. She muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "Back again, Mr. Adequate?" The nickname had stuck. Tristan grimaced. "I don't appreciate being called that." "Then stop acting like it fits." She grinned, though her tone was sharp enough to draw another ripple of laughter from the customers nearby. "What do you want today? More stew? Or are you finally ready to taste something new?" The words lingered between them. Tristan raised an eyebrow. "And what do you recommend, chef?" Rosie crossed her arms. "Collard greens, catfish, and a slice of pecan pie. That'll teach you what real flavor is." He hesitated. Fried food wasn't his style. His diet had been regimented for years, protein shakes, lean meats, nothing too heavy. Yet, something in Rosie's challenge stirred him. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking he was afraid. "Fine," he said. "I'll take the lot." Rosie smirked. "Now we're talking." He sat at a nearby table, balancing the plate Logan had paid for, again. The golden brown catfish was crisp, the greens glossy with seasoning, the pie rich with syrup and nuts. The first bite of catfish startled him. The crunch gave way to tender flesh, seasoned perfectly with a kick of spice. The collard greens followed, tangy with vinegar, layered with smoky undertones. And then the pie, sweet, nutty, decadent, finished the meal with indulgence he hadn't allowed himself in years. It wasn't just food. It was an experience. Each bite seemed to peel away another layer of the armor he wore. He could almost hear his mother's laugh again, smell her kitchen, feel the warmth of a time when he wasn't Tristan Kane the billionaire, but simply Tristan, the boy who once believed life could be simple and good. For a moment he let himself close his eyes. "You look like a man having a religious experience," Rosie's voice teased. Tristan opened his eyes to find her standing across the table, wiping her hands on a towel. She had a half-smile, not unkind but undeniably amused. "Hardly," he said, clearing his throat. "It's acceptable." She laughed, shaking her head. "You've got the worst poker face. I can tell you love it." He set down the fork, meeting her gaze. "Maybe I do." The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. For a beat, neither of them spoke. Then Rosie broke the silence, her voice softer this time. "Food can do that, you know. Remind you of things you thought you'd forgotten." Tristan's chest tightened. He wanted to ask how she knew that, what memories her food carried for her, but he stopped himself. Vulnerability wasn't something he handed out. Instead he deflected. "You're very sure of yourself." Her smile returned, brighter now. "I have to be. Confidence is the only way people take you seriously when you're a black woman running a business in a small town. Doubt yourself for even a second, and folks will eat you alive." Her honesty startled him. There was no pretense in her words, no attempt to soften the truth. She was simply telling him how it was. And Tristan, who had built his empire on hiding every weakness, found himself oddly drawn to it. "You don't care what people think of you," he said. "Not if it costs me who I am," Rosie replied. Then she tilted her head. "What about you, Tristan Kane? Do you even know who you are when no one's watching?" The question hit like a strike to the chest. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Before he could respond, Rosie was called back to her stall. She gave him a small wave and walked away, her curls bouncing under the lantern lights. Tristan sat there, staring at the empty plate, feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It wasn't just hunger she'd fed. It was something deeper, something dangerous. For the first time in years, Tristan Kane felt the stirrings of a life he hadn't realized he missed. One flavored with simplicity, warmth, and perhaps even love. And he knew, with a sinking certainty, that Rosie Miller wasn't just another woman. She was the beginning of a story he hadn't intended to write. For the first time in years, Tristan Kane wasn't Tristan Kane. He was just a tall man in rolled-up sleeves, walking through Willow Creek's summer jubilee with a paper plate in his hand. No one stopped him for photos. No one shoved a microphone in his face or asked about quarterly earnings. The townsfolk glanced his way, sure, but only in passing, as though he were any other out-of-towner drifting through their little festival. And it was liberating. He'd never admit it aloud, not even to Logan, but the anonymity felt like a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "See," Logan murmured as they strolled past the pie-eating contest. "You're blending in just fine." Tristan adjusted his sunglasses. "You sound smug." "I am smug." Logan smirked. "For once, people aren't treating you like a celebrity. They don't care who you are. And judging by the fact that you haven't barked at anyone in the past 20 minutes, I'd say you're enjoying it." Tristan didn't reply. But he couldn't deny it, he was enjoying it. The simplicity. The quiet. The freedom of being just another man in the crowd. And most of all, the freedom to linger near Rosie Miller without her having the faintest clue who he was. Rosie had drawn a crowd again, her stall buzzing with laughter and chatter. She was more radiant today than ever, her curls catching the sunlight as she handed out bowls of jambalaya. She moved with confidence, not performance. Her smile unpolished but genuine, her voice carrying warmth like a song everyone wanted to hear. Tristan waited until the line thinned before stepping forward. Rosie spotted him instantly, her lips quirking. "Well, if it isn't my favorite critic," she said. "Back for another round?" Tristan's mouth curved into something close to a smile. "You make it sound like I can't stay away." "Can you?" she challenged, one brow arched. He hesitated, then allowed himself a rare honesty. "Apparently not." Rosie blinked, caught off guard. Her smirk softened into something warmer before she turned back to the pot, ladling a generous serving into a bowl. "This one's jambalaya. Spicy. Think you can handle it, city boy? Try me." He took the bowl, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed it over. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered longer than it should have. Tristan turned away quickly, retreating to the shade of a nearby tree before tasting the food. The jambalaya hit him like fire and music all at once. Spiced sausage, tender shrimp, rice soaked in bold flavors that made his eyes water. He coughed lightly, then took another bite, determined not to let Rosie see him falter. She caught his reaction anyway, laughing from across the counter. "Too much for you?" "Not at all," he said, forcing composure. "It's intense." "That's life," Rosie replied, still smiling. "If it doesn't make your eyes water a little, what's the point?" That evening, as lanterns glowed overhead and music filled the square, Tristan drifted back to Rosie's stall. Business had slowed. Most families were gathering near the stage for the talent show. Rosie was stacking trays when she looked up, surprised. "You again?" she said, wiping her hands. "You must be addicted by now." "Maybe I just like the company," Tristan said. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Rosie stilled, her eyes narrowing slightly, as though she was trying to decide whether he was teasing her or being genuine. "You've got a funny way of showing it," she said lightly. "Most men don't insult my cooking on day one." Tristan almost smiled. "Most men probably don't challenge you either." Her laughter rang out, low and rich. "Fair enough." They fell into easy conversation, surprisingly natural despite the barbs they had traded before. Rosie told him about her grandmother, who had taught her every recipe she now served. About the hours she worked at the diner in town to save enough to open Rosie's kitchen full-time. About the pride she felt seeing her food bring people together. Tristan listened more than he spoke. For once, he didn't feel the need to dominate the conversation. He let her words wash over him like music, grounding him in a world so different from his own. When she finally asked, "So what do you do, Tristan?" he froze for a heartbeat too long. "I travel," he said finally. "Consulting. Different places, different projects." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. But it wasn't the truth either. Rosie studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Figures. You don't have the look of someone tied down." Her acceptance unsettled him even more than suspicion might have. As the festival wound down and families drifted home, Tristan walked back to the rented house in silence. Logan, trailing behind, finally spoke. "You're enjoying this?" he said quietly. "Being no one. Pretending." Tristan didn't answer right away. He stared up at the night sky, dotted with stars that the city lights usually drowned out. For once, he wasn't Tristan Kane the billionaire. He wasn't a headline, a scandal, or a walking fortune. He was just a man who had eaten jambalaya under lantern lights, laughed with a woman who didn't care about his name, and carried apples for a stranger. And God help him, he didn't want it to end. The festival stretched long into the evening, lanterns glowing like fireflies suspended in the trees, laughter carrying over the music of fiddles and guitars. Willow Creek's summer jubilee had transformed the town square into something out of a dream. Children chasing each other with sparklers, couples swaying near the fountain, families gathered on quilts with plates of pie. Tristan Kane stood at the edge of it all, hands in his pockets, watching. He had attended galas glittering with chandeliers worth more than this entire square, but none of those rooms had ever felt alive the way this one did. Alive and complicated. Because somewhere at the heart of the glow was Rosie Miller, wiping her hands on her apron, her laughter carrying as she traded jokes with a group of customers. She hadn't slowed all day, yet she radiated energy as though the festival itself fed her spirit. Tristan knew he should walk away, return to the rented house and keep his walls intact. But his feet moved toward her stall before he could stop them. Rosie spotted him instantly. Her lips curled into a grin that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "Well, look who's back," she teased, setting down a ladle. "I'm starting to think you're stalking my stall." "Maybe your food's better than you think," Tristan said smoothly. Rosie let out a low laugh. "Careful, city boy. Flattery sounds strange coming from you." He tilted his head, eyes locked with hers. "Who says I'm flattering?" For a moment, the air between them tightened. Rosie broke it first, busying herself with stacking trays. "You always this mysterious, or is it a festival thing?" "Depends who's asking." "Rosie Miller," she said, lifting her chin. "Owner, cook, and occasional referee when the friar misbehaves." "Tristan Kane," he replied before he could stop himself. Then quickly, "Consultant. Traveler." She studied him with narrowed eyes as if trying to decide what kind of man needed sunglasses at dusk. But instead of pressing, she shrugged. "Traveler, huh? Well, welcome to Willow Creek. You're officially initiated once you've danced in the square." Tristan's brows shot up. "Danced?" Rosie's grin widened. Don't tell me you've never two-stepped. Can't say I have. Well then tonight's your lucky night. She didn't give him a chance to protest. Wiping her hands, Rosie stepped out from behind the stall, took his wrist and tugged him toward the square. Tristan stiffened, but the warmth of her fingers against his skin unraveled some hidden knot in his chest. The fiddle struck up a lively tune, couples clapping and spinning. Rosie turned to him, her eyes gleaming. "Relax," she whispered. "Follow my lead." Tristan, who had commanded empires, found himself strangely nervous. But when Rosie placed her hand in his, grounding him with her touch, he let her pull him into the rhythm. At first his movements were stiff, awkward. Rosie laughed, teasing him without cruelty. "You've got two left feet." "Careful," he said, attempting a spin. "I don't fail at things." "Except dancing," she quipped, but her laughter softened the jab. Slowly Tristan loosened, letting the beat carry him. The crowd blurred, the fiddles blending into the hum of lantern-lit magic. Rosie's curls bounced as she moved, her laughter rising above the music. Her joy was infectious, seeping into him until he found himself laughing too, unrestrained, uncalculated. It had been years since he'd laughed like that. The song slowed, shifting into something gentler. Couples drew closer, swaying under the lanterns. Rosie hesitated, her hand still resting in his. "You don't have to," she murmured. But Tristan surprised them both by tightening his grip, pulling her closer. "Maybe I want to." She stilled for a breath, searching his eyes. Whatever she found seemed to quiet her doubt, because she let herself lean in, her head tilting slightly toward him. They swayed together, unhurried. Rosie's warmth pressed into him, her scent carrying faint traces of spice and something sweet, like honey. Tristan's heart, usually a guarded fortress, pounded with uncharacteristic urgency. "You're full of surprises," Rosie whispered. Tristan's mouth curved into a rare, genuine smile. "So are you." For a few precious minutes the rest of the world disappeared. He wasn't Tristan Kane the billionaire. She wasn't a stranger in a small town. They were just two people beneath the lanterns, moving to a rhythm older than either of them. The music ended, applause breaking the spell. Rosie pulled back, her cheeks flushed, her smile wide. "Not bad for your first time," she teased. "I had a good teacher," Tristan replied. For a moment they simply stood there, the crowd dispersing around them. Rosie glanced back toward her stall reluctantly. "I should check on my stand. People still want late-night snacks." Tristan nodded, though part of him wanted to protest. "Of course." She started to walk away, then paused. "Hey, city boy?" "Yes." Rosie's eyes sparkled. "Don't disappear before tomorrow. The festival's not over yet." Then she was gone, her curls bouncing as she vanished back into the crowd. Tristan stood rooted, staring after her. Logan's voice jolted him from his daze. "You're in trouble," his assistant murmured, appearing at his side. Tristan didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. Because in one evening, beneath paper lanterns and fiddles, he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He wasn't just hiding anymore. He was falling. The morning after the lantern dance, Rosie woke with a flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She tried to push it down as she stirred a pot of gumbo for the early festival crowd, but memories of last night refused to leave her alone. The way Tristan's laugh had surprised her, the warmth of his hand on her back, the gentleness she hadn't expected from a man who carried himself with such intensity. And yet, even as she smiled remembering it, something gnawed at her. He was kind, yes. Charming in his strange city boy way. But he was also guarded. Careful. Like a man balancing on a rope stretched over secrets. Rosie shook the thought off as her first customers arrived, but it lingered like a shadow at the edge of her mind. Across town, Tristan was wide awake, staring out the window of the small rental house Logan had secured for him. The house was quaint, wooden floors that creaked, curtains that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the sort of place designed for comfort, not hiding. Logan entered with his laptop balanced on one hand. "You made the front page of the Daily Ledger again," he said flatly, setting the screen on the table. A headline blared. "Kane Industries under fire, CEO missing in action." Tristan grimaced. "I told you to keep that away from me." "You can't run from it forever," Logan replied. "The board is demanding answers. Investors are circling like vultures. And meanwhile he glanced at Tristan's shirt, rumpled from sleep, and added with a smirk, "two-stepping with a local chef under fairy lights." Tristan shot him a glare. Careful. Logan raised his hands in mock surrender. Look, I get it. She's different. But secrets don't stay buried in towns like this. Someone will recognize you. And when they do, she'll know you lied. Tristan turned back to the window, jaw tight. The worst part wasn't Logan's warning. It was that he knew Logan was right. By noon, Rosie was busier than ever. Tourists had begun arriving from neighboring towns, filling the square with chatter and curiosity. Her gumbo was selling faster than she could ladle it, and her sweet cornbread tray had already been wiped clean. She barely noticed when Tristan appeared at the side of her stall until a pair of strong hands reached to steady a tipping pot. Careful, he murmured, flashing a grin. Rosie startled, then shook her head. Do you always sneak up on people? Only you. She rolled her eyes, but her lips betrayed her with a smile. Here. She shoved a small bowl of gumbo toward him. On the house. Are you sure? I'd hate to think you're playing favorites. You are my favorite customer, she teased, then regretted it instantly as heat rose to her cheeks. Tristan didn't miss it. His grin softened into something tender. But before he could speak, a woman's sharp voice cut through the crowd. Well, I'll be damned. Isn't that Tristan Kane? Rosie's head snapped up. A tall woman in sunglasses stood a few feet away, clutching a glossy shopping bag. Her friend gasped, whispering behind her hand. Tristan stiffened, bowl frozen halfway to his lips. You must be mistaken, he said coolly. But the woman laughed, pulling off her shades. Mistaken? Please. I've seen you on Forbes covers. You're the billionaire, aren't you? The one all over the news. The stall went quiet, nearby customers turning to listen. Rosie's heart thudded as she looked between the woman and Tristan. Billionaire? She blinked, waiting for Tristan to deny it, to laugh it off. But he didn't. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and he simply set the bowl down. I think you're confusing me with someone else, he said, voice low. The woman arched a brow but let it drop, muttering as she walked away. Still, the tension remained, heavy in the air. Rosie swallowed hard. Tristan, who are you? For a beat, he didn't answer. Then, forcing a smile, he said, just a traveler. Remember? Rosie tried to smile back, but unease prickled at her skin. His words were smooth, but his eyes carried a storm. Later that night, as the festival lights dimmed and Rosie packed away her supplies, the question gnawed at her again. Who exactly had she danced with under the lanterns? A man who claimed to be a traveler? Or a man hiding something far bigger? She sat on the edge of her stall, watching the square empty. Her heart wanted to believe Tristan was exactly who he seemed when he laughed with her. But her instincts whispered otherwise. And Rosie Miller had learned the hard way, instincts were rarely wrong. Meanwhile, Tristan stood alone at the edge of town, staring at his phone. A dozen missed calls. Half a dozen urgent texts. And a headline flashing across his news app. Tristan Kane spotted in small-town festival? Rumors swirl. His chest tightened. The shadows were closing in. And Rosie, sweet, fiery Rosie, was tangled in them now. For the first time, Tristan wondered if his presence in Willow Creek wasn't just reckless. It might destroy the very thing he didn't know he was searching for, until now. The town square had never felt so loud. Words spread faster than wildfire, first whispered by the woman in sunglasses, then echoed in murmurs between customers, until by evening half of Willow Creek was buzzing with one unbelievable claim. The quiet stranger hanging around Rosie Miller's stall was Tristan Kane, the billionaire. By the time Rosie returned to her stall the next day, the air was thick with it. Strangers crowded around, not for gumbo but to gawk. Some snapped photos of the empty stall with their phones, hoping to catch sight of him. Rosie tried to steady her breath as she set out trays of cornbread. But every smile felt forced, every movement stiff. She kept scanning the crowd for Tristan, though part of her prayed he wouldn't show up. He did. Tristan walked into the square just as the church bell struck noon. He wasn't in one of his suits, just jeans and a dark button-down, but he couldn't disguise the weight of who he was anymore. People recognized him now. Their whispers followed him like a tide. Rosie froze, a ladle clutched in her hand. Their eyes met across the square. He came straight to her stall, ignoring the stares and the murmurs. Rosie, he said softly. Don't. Her voice shook. She set the ladle down with a clang. You should have told me. He opened his mouth, but she pressed on. All this time you've been lying, playing some game. It wasn't a game. His voice was sharp, urgent. I didn't come here to fool you. I came here to disappear, to breathe. And then I found you. Found me? She scoffed. You found my food stall, Tristan. You found someone who didn't know your name and you liked the attention, or the lack of it. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me who you really are. The crowd was thickening now, curious eyes glued to them. Rosie's cheeks burned, but she refused to look away. Rosie, please, he said. I wanted to tell you. Every time we talked, I wanted to. But what? Her voice cracked. You thought I'd treat you differently? That I'd only see dollar signs? He flinched. She saw it in his eyes, the exact fear he hadn't wanted to admit. Rosie's chest tightened. You don't get it. I've worked for everything I have. My name, my stall, my food, it's mine. And I let you in. I let you close. And all along you've been hiding behind a mask. Because I'm not the man they write about in those headlines, Tristan said, his voice low. Not with you. With you I'm just me. And I was terrified of losing that. For a flicker of a second, Rosie wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the man who had laughed under the lanterns was real, that the way he looked at her meant more than his secrets. But then a voice called out from the crowd. Tristan Kane. Over here, look this way. A camera flash went off. Another voice shouted about Kane Industries, about lawsuits, about scandals. Rosie's heart plummeted. This wasn't a quiet man passing through town. This was a storm, and it was crashing into her world. I can't do this, she whispered. Tristan's eyes widened. Rosie, I can't. She ripped off her apron, tossed it onto the counter, and pushed past him. The crowd parted as she hurried through, their eyes following her, but she didn't care. She just needed to breathe, to think, to get away from the weight of his truth pressing down on her. Rosie didn't stop until she reached the edge of town, where the meadow opened wide and the festival lights were only a faint glow behind her. She sank onto the grass, her chest heaving. For years she had fought to build something that was hers, something real. And just when she had let her heart open again after so long, she discovered she'd been standing on quicksand. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her best friend, Carla. You okay? Whole town's talking. Rosie stared at the screen, tears stinging her eyes. She typed and erased half a dozen replies before shoving the phone away. No words could explain what she was feeling. Meanwhile, Tristan stood alone by Rosie's empty stall. The crowd had dispersed, disappointed their show was over, but the hollow ache inside him remained. Logan appeared at his side, holding a phone. The press already picked it up. Photos. Gossip. Your cover's gone. Tristan barely looked at him. His eyes were still on the spot where Rosie had stood. Do you care? Logan asked carefully. Yes. His voice was raw. Not about the press. Not about the company. About her. Logan sighed. Then you'd better figure out how to fix this. Because right now, she thinks you're just another rich man who plays with people's lives. Tristan clenched his fists, a knot forming in his chest. He had spent years controlling empires, negotiating billion-dollar deals, commanding respect. But here in this quiet town, with one woman who had seen him for more than his name, he was powerless. And for the first time he realized he would rather lose everything else than lose Rosie. Rosie lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling as the crickets chirped outside her window. Sleep wouldn't come. Her thoughts chased each other in restless circles. She remembered the way Tristan had looked at her across the dance floor. The way he had laughed, unguarded, when she teased him. The way he had steadied her pot of gumbo without hesitation. Those moments felt true. Real. But the truth of his name, his world, it was too big, too dangerous. She didn't know if she could survive being pulled into it. One thing was certain. The storm had broken. And nothing would ever be simple again. The festival was over. Lanterns still hung above Main Street, swaying gently in the night breeze, but the music and laughter had long faded. The stalls were half disassembled, stray paper cups rolling across the pavement, and Willow Creek was slipping back into its usual stillness. Rosie Miller sat on the back steps of her food stall, chin propped on her hand. She had told everyone she was just cleaning up, but really she was hiding, stalling for the courage to go home. Her chest was heavy with everything that had unraveled. The scrape of footsteps broke the quiet. She stiffened, not needing to look to know who it was. Rosie, came Tristan's voice, low and tentative. She turned slightly. There he was, no cameras, no crowd, just a man in a plain jacket, hair tousled, eyes searching hers like they were the only compass he had left. She looked away. "Shouldn't you be halfway back to your penthouse by now?" He exhaled, not offended, not defensive. "Just tired. I don't want to be in a penthouse. Not tonight. Not if it means being without you." Silence stretched. Rosie gripped the edge of the step until her knuckles whitened. "You should have told me," she whispered finally. "I don't care about your money, Tristan. I care that you didn't trust me with the truth." He moved closer but stopped short, leaving a careful space between them. "You're right. I was selfish. I wanted to know what it felt like to just be a man. Not a headline, not a name people use to get something. Just someone sitting at a food stall, eating gumbo made by a woman who looked at me like I wasn't a stranger in disguise." Her throat tightened. Tristan's voice softened. "With you, I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a scandal. I was just Tristan. And I didn't want to lose that. But in trying to protect it, I ended up hurting you." Finally, Rosie turned to face him fully. His eyes were tired but open, stripped of the arrogance she had once assumed came naturally to him. "Do you know how it felt," she said quietly, "to stand there while everyone stared, whispering about us? About me? Like I was some fool who had no idea who she'd been cooking for?" His jaw flexed, regret flickering across his features. "I do now. And I hate that I put you there." They sat in silence, the creak of the wooden steps beneath them the only sound. For the first time since the secret had broken, Rosie felt the wall of anger around her soften. Not disappear, but shift enough to let something else through. Tristan reached into his jacket pocket, hesitated, then pulled out a small, wrinkled piece of paper. He held it out awkwardly. "What's this?" Rosie asked, suspicion flickering. "A recipe," he admitted. "I asked one of the vendors to write it down for me. Peach cobbler. Thought maybe I'd try to make it sometime." Rosie blinked, surprised. "You? Cooking?" His lips curved faintly. "Don't laugh. I'm hopeless in the kitchen. But I thought, maybe if I can learn, I'll understand a little more of your world. The part that makes you light up when you talk about food. The part that's real and grounded and not about money." The simple gesture, clumsy, almost childlike, squeezed something inside her chest. "You don't have to change who you are for me," she murmured. "I know," he said softly. "But I want to meet you where you are. I want you to know I see you, Rosie. Not as a small-town cook. Not as some escape. As the woman he faltered, emotion catching. As the woman I don't want to lose." The quiet settled between them again, heavier now, but warmer. Rosie stared at the recipe in his hand. Peach cobbler. So ordinary, so simple. Yet it was the first real sign she'd seen that he wasn't here to dazzle her with wealth or charm. He was here because he wanted to stay. Her heart warred with her head, but for once, her heart won. She reached out, taking the crumpled paper from his fingers. Their hands brushed, and the warmth of his skin lingered against hers. "You'll burn the kitchen down before you get halfway through this?" she teased, voice softer now. A grin tugged at his mouth. "Probably. But maybe you'll be there to stop me." Rosie rolled her eyes, but her lips betrayed her, curving upward just slightly. For the first time since the truth had broken, the weight on her chest eased. Not gone, not forgotten, but lighter, like maybe the road ahead wasn't impossible. Tristan stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe, not rushing her. That, more than anything, told her he understood. Finally, Rosie let out a long breath. "I don't know what this looks like, Tristan. Your world and mine, they don't fit easy." "They don't have to," he said simply. "I don't care if it's complicated. I care that it's with you." The words landed softly but surely, like pebbles in a pond sending ripples outward. Rosie studied him a long time, then leaned back against the step, exhaustion finally loosening its grip. "We'll take it slow. No promises, no cameras, no headlines. Just slow." Tristan's smile was small but genuine. "Slow sounds perfect." The lanterns above them swayed gently, casting a soft golden light. For the first time in days, Rosie felt the air in Willow Creek settle again, quiet and calm. And though the world outside would still clamor, for now, in this small pocket of stillness, two hearts had found their way back to each other, quietly, carefully, and with the kind of strength that didn't need a spotlight. If this story touched your heart, remember, Sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.